Good afternoon. You are very welcome to join us at this EUMICON Digital Conference 2020 titled Recovery Made in Europe. It is the European Mineral Resources Confederation's event that this year is happening online for very obvious reasons. I want to tell you a little bit about today's agenda. We will have a keynote interview, as it were, at the beginning, a message from the Commissioner, two panels with discussions and a wrap-up dialogue. So we want you to get involved. We want you to share your thoughts with us and with our speakers via social media. You can use the hashtag Made in Europe or, of course, the hashtag EUMICON. And we want you to share your questions as well using the tools provided. Today, we want a really interactive debate. We want a discussion. So I will be asking questions of you, the audience, via a poll. And of course, in return, I want you to ask questions of the speakers. Now, my name is Jennifer Baker. My job here today is really just to keep everyone on time. So I'm really relying on lots of input and enthusiastic participation, which I am sure we will have. Now, with that, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker. Our keynote is Roman Schiffner, who is the Secretary General of EUMICON and who can give us an outlook on what we can suspect from today's program. Roman, very welcome to you. As we know, Europe is in desperate need of economic recovery. So what does recovery made in Europe mean to you personally? Is there a specific message behind this title for today's event?
Yeah, first of all, I think we all are experiencing in these days two major developments in Europe. Firstly, I think we are all affected by the challenging consequences of COVID-19. And we are also witnessing the economic transformation aiming at making European economy green and more digitalized. I think these two factors pose a variety of changes to Europe's industry. And we are firmly convinced that the undertaking of making Europe's economy fit for the future and recovering from the current crisis is achievable. But however, and I think this is the key message that we would like to convey in the next upcoming hours, European industrial ecosystems must be at the heart of our ongoing recovery efforts. And so in short, promoting European value chain creation has always been Europe's core message. And as we reflect this very crucial year 2020, it has even become more important than ever.
Well, at today's event, and for those joining us online, there will be a range of different stakeholders, many of whom are just getting to know EUMICON. So can you please tell me a little bit more, in your own words, a bit about the background and describe the organization, please?
Yeah, first of all, and thank you, Jennifer, for pointing out that. Let me express my warm welcome to all of you. I am more than delighted to welcome so many new, but also familiar stakeholders today. We as EUMICON are organizing a couple of stakeholder dialogues in the last years, and I have seen it growing steadily. Today, we are happy about more than 400 registrations, so participants literally from across the entire European continent, almost every country of the European Union, and stakeholders from other regions like the US, Canada, and even Africa are part of us today. So I couldn't be more excited about your attendance today. But let me also take the opportunity to express my gratitude to the European Commission. On the one hand, to the team of DG GROW, we truly value this cooperation and the overall support. And on the other hand, I extend my deepest appreciations to Mr. Vice President Maroš Šefčovič for contributing to this very conference and to his continuous and tireless efforts on behalf of the European industry. Let me also welcome and especially thank you all the panelists today, and of course you, Jennifer, being once again our moderator. But for both of us, it's new. It's the first digital conference we have, and I'm looking forward to this new experience. But now coming back to your questions, EUMICON, what's EUMICON? EUMICON is a proactive multi-stakeholder platform, and we represent three future-orientated value chains. There are energy, it's digitization and mobility. And I want to point out it's more important than ever that we seek for a cross-sectoral cooperation in this field. So we believe that only By involving all the stakeholders, valuable solutions can be achieved. And EUMICON speaks to all the stakeholders, including the trade associations, NGOs, academics, corporate representatives, and also political stakeholders. So I welcome you to get in touch and become involved, become part of this family for raw materials. So let's shape Europe's industrial agenda together.
Thank you. As you say, this new crisis has led to some good outcomes, which is unusual, but we can talk to people, as you say, across Europe and around the world in a way we maybe couldn't have imagined even 12 months ago. So let me ask you, what do you expect then from today's agenda?
Yeah, we would like to convey our mission. Europe's mission, EUMICON's mission is to drive forward the dialogue in Europe. Especially now, it's more important to face the facts and to speak about the actual concerns and fears of our affected industries. Let's call it what it is. We care about reducing the CO2 emissions to protect our planets. That's crystal clear, and that's our commitment. But on the same time, we may wonder how we can counter the rising side costs or the energy prices. Or we wonder how we can create a level playing field, especially in the trade with Asia or China. So our common efforts in fighting the climate change can be successful. And of course, we wonder how to achieve a European recovery. How are the European companies able to survive in such an environment? Therefore, and that's the mission of EUMICON, we look for solution-oriented and open discussions, as well as the opportunity to interconnect all the stakeholders like we do it today. And this should be the heart of the program today.
Thank you very much, Roman, for that background and for setting the scene for us for the rest of this afternoon. I hope you enjoy the discussions as well while you're following along. With that, I will turn now, as Roman mentioned, we do have a message from the Vice President, from Maros Šefčovič, who unfortunately couldn't be with us, but he has sent these thoughts.
Good afternoon. I wish I could join you online, but my thanks to EUMICON for inviting me to speak to you via this video message. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc across Europe at terrible cost, both human and economic. In response, the EU and its member states have spent billions on saving lives and livelihoods. But even as we fight to contain the virus and minimize its effect, we must also look to the future. This crisis has given us a once-in-a-generation opportunity to shape Europe we want. In doing so, it has also underlined the importance of strengthening Europe's resilience and strategic autonomy in critical industrial sectors and key technologies. In Next Generation EU, our historic €750 billion recovery plan, which we presented together with a revamped long-term budget, we have a ready-made tool to seize this opportunity. This instrument will be crucial as we accelerate the twin green and digital transition, together with a heightened use of strategic foresight in our policymaking, key building blocks in our recovery. Mineral resources and their value chains are a vital part of this effort. Many important new technologies and future infrastructure will require substantial additional quantities of raw materials. This includes rare earth elements for permanent magnets in wind generators and electric motors, platinum group metals for hydrogen electrolyzers and fuel cells, and lithium and cobalt for batteries. For example, our foresight data shows that by 2050, in the renewable energy and e-mobility sectors alone, the EU is expected to need up to 60 times more lithium and 15 times more cobalt than the current supply for the entire economy. Currently, however, we have an overdependence on suppliers outside the European Union. For example, we import 98% of rare earths from China, 78% of lithium from Chile, and 68% of cobalt from Congo. We cannot afford to replace our dependence on fossil fuels with one on critical raw materials. To tackle this, in September, we adopted a new strategy on critical raw materials to strengthen the security of raw material supply chains while increasing sustainability and social responsibility standards. It outlines how we can diversify supplies from third countries, increase sustainable domestic sourcing, and boost circularity to reduce these overdependence. For example, lithium production capacity in Europe, if fully developed and exploited, could nearly meet our annual needs for electromobility and stationary energy by 2025. We must also put an increased focus on secondary raw materials. While European manufacturers recycle more than half of metals such as iron, zinc, and platinum, that figure drops to less than 1 percentage point for critical raw materials like gallium, indium, and certain rare earth elements. To foster sustainable competitiveness and a circular economy, the Commission will put forward a new regulation on batteries this year, which will propose standards on minimal carbon footprint, on the transparent, ethical sourcing of raw materials, and on high recycling standards, including targets for recycling efficiency, materials recovery, and recycled content. To further reduce our vulnerabilities, we need to work towards the concept of open strategic autonomy as a part of our geopolitical resilience. This means keeping an open approach to trade whilst also establishing strategic value chains in Europe and thus bolstering our leading role on the global stage. Industrial alliances are an excellent approach to this. We already have a notable success in this regard. The European Battery Alliance. Launched in 2017, the alliance was created to build a globally competitive, sustainable, and innovative European battery value chain, amounting to a market value of 250 billion euro by 2025. With more than 500 industrial actors, the alliance has become a resounding success in just 3 years, turning Europe into a global battery hotspot. In 2019, it attracted some 60 billion euro in investment across the whole value chain, with 25 billion so far in 2020, 3 times and twice the amount in China, respectively. We are now adapting the framework of the European Battery Alliance so it can serve as a blueprint for other strategic sectors. For example, in September, together with my colleague, Commissioner Thierry Breton, we launched a dedicated raw materials alliance to build a strong, competitive, and sustainable raw materials value chain covering extraction, refining, and recycling. This can help mobilize all relevant actors and identify investment opportunities while helping shape a stimulating regulatory and financial framework for the industry. But for an alliance like this to meet real needs, entrepreneurs, innovators, universities, and researchers in the field of raw materials must play a leading role. We count on industry, on you, to join the alliance and really take ownership of it. The principles of openness, transparency, and inclusiveness are equally important. Today presents an excellent opportunity to make progress on these efforts. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all a pleasant and productive conference.
Well, thank you very much there to the Commissioner. We're delighted that he was able to send us those thoughts. We're now moving on to the panel discussion, the first panel discussion of this afternoon, and that is called Corona and the Level Playing Field. So during this panel, we are going to have poll questions that I will be asking you, the audience, to contribute your answers to, that we will also discuss with the panelists so we can get a 360-degree view of what all those involved in today's session think about the issues. Throughout the part of the discussion, we will break it down into different topics, including international trade and the role of China, the concept of strategic autonomy, and indeed specific trade measures. All that to be tackled by our first panelist. So let me begin by introducing those panelists to you. We have Rob Van Giels, CEO of HAI Aluminium, Peter Handley, Head of Unit in energy-intensive industries and raw materials at DG Grow in the European Commission, and Julia Anderson, Economic Research Analyst at Bruegel, and we will also be joined from the European Parliament. Now, as I promised, we are going to have all of those poll questions. So perhaps let's start with a first poll question to test that it's all working. So our first question is, what is your prediction regarding China as the trade partner of the EU in the future? So if you can open your polls, you should be able to, everyone watching, see that poll. You have got three options. China will A, be a frenemy, B, be an ally in preserving the future of global free trade, or C, lose its shackles and assert more pressure on Europe. The poll is open. I'm going to now get our panelists' response to the question while I let you vote, and we will come back and see the results very, very shortly. So, Peter, perhaps I will start with you. What is your reaction to that question? What's your prediction regarding China as a trade partner of the EU in the future?
There we are, unmuted.
Great.
My answer is D. I'm not going to get locked into one of those predefined choices. Complicated. But we did say in the communication last spring of 2019 that we were rethinking and recalibrating Europe's relationship with China, that it was a strategic competitor in some areas. And in areas like climate mitigation, it's clearly a strong ally. It's one of the few regions in the world that has set a climate neutrality target. So, in that sense, it's an ally. In other senses, it's a competitor. We have to live and work with China. But as my commissioner is often saying, we cannot afford to be naive.
Rob, your thoughts then on the question. I presume, rather like Peter, you will say all of the above or none of the above, but you won't be drawn on one. But do give me your thoughts on the question.
I mean, I think that's exactly what it is, right? I mean, we know that China will be a partner for us in future. It needs to be, but we have to make sure that we have level playing field. And China so far is not market economy. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So we really have to work hard and be strong to make sure that they follow the rules. It's as simple as that. I think Europe is open for allies and for collaborations, but we cannot be naive. That needs to be underlined, and I think there is still quite a journey and a road to go to make sure that we are not.
And Julia, your thoughts?
I guess I'll say frenemy. To give a little bit of data and facts to structure the conversation, I think it's important to think about the importance of China and maybe the growing importance of China as a trading partner. I mean, first of all, China is leading the global recovery. It has recovered in a way that will allow it to have positive GDP growth in 2020. It will grow by 2% this year, 8% next year, which means that by 2021, the Chinese economy will actually be 10% larger than it was in 2019. At the same time, exports are growing. They grew by 5% in 2019, while at the same time, global export fell by 3%. So I think it would be a mistake to not take that seriously. At the same time, as has been mentioned, they will be very important in helping us achieve our green ambitions and in recovery. So I think we need to, it's in our interest to stay close to China, but of course, at the same time, we are recognizing and increasingly accepting the fact that it has a very different economic model and that we are probably not going to be able to change it in the near future. And this has important implications for European businesses in Europe, which have to compete with sometimes heavily subsidized Chinese competitors, but also European companies in China, which are increasingly being excluded, especially in sectors that have been identified by Made in China 2025 as being critical to Chinese future growth. There are tools, but maybe I'm not going to monopolize that for too long. We can discuss that.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that I was asking you to respond to a poll question, which is always incredibly difficult when you have to narrow down the choices. My follow-up question to all of you is a little bit more broad. What do you think is the most urgent step in dealing, urgent action that's needed really in dealing with anti-competitive behavior from third states in general, not just China? Peter, again, I'll come back to you first.
Well, we need to take a fresh look at our subsidy policies. Because we've had a mixed experience so far in trying to identify when there have been unfair practices. We've just had a case in Indonesia, for example, nickel being subsidized, apparently subsidized, let's use the word allegedly subsidized to favor the development of a domestic stainless steel industry. We haven't been able to approve that case so far. We've also had subsidized production either in Europe or on the boundaries of Europe, which has also involved capital from third countries. So we need to take a fresh look at our subsidy policy, but we also need to do a lot more on the overcapacity front, because some parts of the world are building capacity to create jobs for their own people, which is perfectly right. But there's no market for these except a market which is based on unfair pricing and entry into the European market. So this is something that creates a far from level playing field.
And Rob, do you agree with Peter, or where are the points of similarity or disagreement?
And if I can speak for the aluminium industry, that's of course in my main interest due to my business, I think it's very clear that the first step, as the rest will be a quite long journey, is that we have to make sure until we have the right rules in place. And I think there's a lot of work to do on WTO level, where they are looking into this again, of course. We need to make sure that we also protect our industry. I mean, as a matter of fact, we see in aluminium that there has been a lot of money invested in the global aluminium industry. It's about $70 billion US dollars over the last 5 years. And we know by the OECD report that 85% of that huge amount just went to 5 Chinese companies. So that already underlines that there is really something similar or close to a level playing field. And that's also what we see when we compete against Chinese players. I mean, therefore, we are really happy and really applaud the Commission that they realized that. Just by 15th of October, we have now a duty case in place on aluminium extrusions, and there is another one ongoing on semis for road products. That looks also promising. So I think, we know China remains a major trade partner, right? Nobody is doubting that, and it's really a very tricky thing for us to handle this, but we need to make sure that we have level playing field. Otherwise, we all focus now on this greener future. We are really willing to support that. We are leading in this. We are focusing on future products and sectors, but China is producing massively and much faster than the Europeans, and they disturb our markets, and they really put our value chain at risk. And the raw materials produced in those value chains are at the end of the day also needed in the products that we want to create innovative for our together more sustainable future. So it's a tricky challenge, but I really think the first step needs to be protective and strong against China, and then on WTO level find a structural solution for this problem.
Julia, what do you think is the most urgent action to tackle the sort of behaviours that Rob there is speaking about? Not specifically China, any third country that's outside the EU. What is needed?
It's hard to, it's hard when you say not specifically China, because my thinking has mostly been around China. I understand that there's also issues with other countries. Turkey apparently is a growing concern. I think a particularly delicate problem is when the issue relates to market access. Because how do you force a country to allow your firms to enter their market? And the issue is not only in terms of not or denying European firms access to those markets. It's also that by blocking or by insulating these markets from foreign competition, you're allowing the emergence of very large dominant firms in those countries, which can then leverage this power in third countries in Europe. And then it seems like foreign subsidy, anti-subsidy instruments, however well conceived they are, and even if they were able to capture all subsidies coming from abroad, will not really address this issue. But they can be leveraged as negotiating instruments to perhaps negotiate the access that would allow for fair global competition.
Thank you for that, Julia. I pushed you there a little bit. Let's see now what the audience has thought. So let's have a look at the poll results. Quite an interesting, clear, the first, I think we can see that lose its shackles and assert more pressure on Europe has almost 50%. Then we have be a frenemy, which is around about 38%, I will guess, from that poll. And finally, it was be an ally in preserving the future of global free trade was the lowest response. To come back to my panel, does that result surprise you, or is that entirely predictable? People think it will put more pressure on Europe rather than being an ally. I think be a frenemy is somewhere in between the two, so we'll take that as an in-between answer. Rob, do you, just in a word or two, do you agree with this poll? Do you agree with the majority of our audience?
I think what we see here that it's not that. I mean, there is a majority, but not a clear one, right? And I think from the arguments we had already in this discussion before, we see that it's really a very complex topic. Obviously, otherwise we would be easier in finding solutions for it. But I think that's what it says, right? That there is not a really clear picture and clear view that is shared by the people joining this conference.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we will move on to the question then, because this is very much related to the question of strategic autonomy. And for that, again, I'm going to come back and ask our audience yet another question. So the new question on strategic autonomy, this also is about decreasing Europe's dependence on imports. So what is your opinion on the recently introduced concept of strategic autonomy? So the question is, what is your opinion on it? And the options are A, absolutely necessary in prevailing at a global level. B, not in the interests of Europe, as we need to save free trade and access at global level through institutions such as the WTO. And C, nice idea, but unrealistic due to heterogeneous interests among member states. So I will let the audience move on there, and please get involved, use the poll. It should be to the right of your screen. We are taking your thoughts into account as we talk to our panelists. So Julia, I'm going to start with you this time to mix things up. What do you think of the concept of strategic autonomy? What does it mean to you? How do you see it?
Yes. Well, maybe to reply to the survey and to copy Peter, I will go for option D, which is that it may be necessary in some cases, but perhaps not the first option. Well, to be a bit academic and give some context, strategic autonomy is not a new idea. It's been floating around for a long time, but maybe now is the time where it's gaining some momentum with the increased risk aversion that COVID-19 has created, and this increased desire to be more to be more resilient. Also for context, it emerged in an environment where globalists are in retreat and free trade is not as popular an idea as it was. But also, of course, what underlies all of this is that China is increasingly perceived as a threat. So I think that Vice President Sharkovich made all of the arguments in favor of it. I think one point he didn't mention is the synergies with the just transition, and I think an interesting idea that was floated in this recent report, which name I don't remember anymore, that was just published by the Commission, is for instance to use coal extraction sites as the basis for new extraction sites. This seems to me like a very interesting plan. But of course, on the downside is the possibility for this initiative to be captured by political and other business interests. So use it if you have to, but be careful of the downsides.
Well, you mentioned resilience, and we are right. We have heard so much about that in the last 6 to 8 months. It's been the message has been driven home very, very clearly. Peter, where do you stand on strategic autonomy? Obviously, we've seen this new Commission presentation on it.
Yeah, well, we came out with this already in the industrial strategy in March, and there's a section in there which says what we should become more resilient as an economy and develop more open strategic autonomy. And this was before we'd even started to feel the real impacts of COVID-19. And it was explained there that this is where there are things that Europe really needs. It's really, really dependent on them, things like pharmaceuticals or critical raw materials. It should not allow itself to be excessively dependent on others. So it's about taking more responsibility, but it's not about saying, make America great again, kind of approach, me first and forget the rest. It's very much plugged into open global markets. And this concept has made a lot of progress over the past few months because it was, again, at the center of the recovery plan, which Vice President Šefčovič presented. And if you look at the European Council conclusions on the 2nd of October, it says strategic autonomy with open global markets is now a key principle of the European Union. That's really elevating it to the highest level of values of the European Union. And the European Council has asked the Commission to carry out a vulnerability assessment of the different technologies and sectors where there are most risks for Europe going forward and to propose actions to reduce those risks.
Rob, what are your thoughts on strategic autonomy?
I mean, for me, it's a clear A. I think we can simply not afford to ignore this, right? I mean, what we learned also in the pandemic is that a full functioning market and single markets are important. At least there need to be options. And we need a strategic autonomy in our global supply chain. I mean, we are going into a recovery phase, and we are talking about industrial leadership and production of computers, batteries, EVs, building renovation, solar panels, and whatever, wind turbines. I mean, at the downside, I mean, we will jeopardize that by increasing dependency on other regions, especially China, because if we don't have the metals and minerals here to do that, we just shift the dependency in another direction. So I think this is really something we have to take very serious and look into that. I mean, we all know, and just to give you an example, out of daily business, right? Magnesium disappeared from Europe. We as an aluminium industry, I mean, magnesium is only 0.some% of the input of my total production in my 9 plants throughout Europe. Nevertheless, with the COVID situation, at the pandemic at the beginning, when we were looking at the magnesium side, at the end of the day, of course, there are certain stocks, but over a very short period of time, I would have had to stop all my production just because of 0.something of my input, because of no access. I mean, we all know that it was solved, but at the end of the day, a very little part of the supply chain could have stopped all of my production. And at the end of the day, my products go into all car producers that are around in Europe, ending up in the situation that they could not produce their cars anymore without the parts that I produce. So you see that really little things can have huge impact, and that's why we really have to carefully look at this, and we have to make sure that we at least balance dependencies, from my opinion, right? If we cannot, we will not be in the position to remove all of those, but I think we at least need to look into alliances and a clear picture of this, that we decrease dependency in our European supply chain, and at least a significant part needs to be under our control, means somehow within Europe, to not be at risk of boosting out of industry because of minor things in terms of volume, but they are needed. So I think that's a very complex topic that we have to cover, and we cannot just ignore it. I think the pandemic has shown that it's a very serious topic that needs to be covered, and we should not let it go now.
Thank you, Rob. You were very forceful there, clearly, in your ideas and thoughts on that. So let's see if the audience agrees with you. I think we can take a look at the results from our poll. And we can see, well, again, it's not really, I think it's absolutely necessary in prevailing at a global level is coming out on top. But that's not to say that people don't think there are unrealistic problems as well due to heterogeneous interests among member states. No one, or only 10% of our audience think that it is not in the interests of Europe. So it's a general trend to thinking it's necessary rather than irrelevant. Let me see then, Peter, what is your reaction to that poll? I mean, it seems that more than 50% of people think it is absolutely necessary. But yet a sizable minority, 30-something%, think that there are unrealistic challenges regarding member states.
I'm not at all surprised. I mean, even if you look at the bigger picture, not just about metals and minerals, but you look at security in the purest sense, it's clear that Europe has to take much more responsibility for itself. We've seen that over the last 4 years. We're not investing enough in our security, and we're not investing enough in our strategic priorities. So I'm clearly on the side of strategic autonomy, but this should not be an excuse to, if you like, break our competition model. We cannot afford just to be saying monopolies are great, because monopolies are not good for markets. They never are.
Right. Well, we have a question come in from a member of the audience. Constantine Drogos has a question for you, Peter. He suggests, there is a suggestion here, yes. The EU has been demining and now aggressively decarbonizing. What is the path the EU envisaged towards sustainable, environmentally friendly energy when there is no production of mineral and products? They say solar panels are all made in China. Metallurgical coal became a critical mineral in the EU since there is no production now. How can we see a path forward? So that's from Constantine Drogos. Peter.
Well, there's a lot in there, isn't there?
There is a lot in there. I do encourage people to put their questions in that chat function, but by all means, please keep them concise as well, because it's quite a lot to read.
So one thing we have to do is decarbonize our whole energy system. This is clear. I was involved in the last Commission's work on this under the Energy Union umbrella, and now we're going to be ramping up the level of energy and climate ambition to 2030. And of course, we've said that we want to be the first part of the world to be climate neutral by 2050. So, I mean, we need to do that. And the work I've been doing with energy intensive industries confirms that the first expectation from industries like the non-ferrous metals is give us clean power at the price we can afford and when and where we need it. So that is a vital prerequisite for this whole transition. Secondly, taking more responsibility, we have allowed ourselves over the last 25 years or so to consider that mining and metals is something not to be proud of, and we should let other people in the world do it. And that's not right, because we're still consuming the stuff. So we should be taking responsibility for A, insisting that people who produce it for us respect good levels of environmental and social performance, but B, that where we can, we should do more ourselves in Europe. Firstly, by trying to get a lot more secondary raw materials out of what's already in the economy, but also where necessary and where there's public acceptance, mining in a responsible way inside Europe itself.
Well, Rob, let me ask you then again, what are the remaining challenges in this area that you see? I mean, there may be many, but where do you think is the best place to start?
Where is the best place to start? I mean, I think if you look at the poll result, right? I think there is no doubt. I mean, I would see that as a clear 90%. I mean, the others say yes, it's a nice idea, but I think it's more about having doubts that we will manage to do it, right? So I think it is clear that there is a clear recognition that we need to find a way forward to solve and to tackle this issue. What's the best way to do it? I think that's a very, very difficult question. I can only give you an answer what I think what needs to be avoided, right? And that's for sure. Whatever we do, we really need to be careful that we do not put any additional burdens on our industry, as we are a front runner in most of the topics we are looking at, right? I mean, it's really more about the market dynamics we have that put us in a difficult position in a lot of those topics. And of course, the most important one is, as already mentioned by Peter, access to clean and competitive energy. If we have that secured, or at least secure that if something comes from outside, we tackle it and make sure that they do not put us in a let's say more difficult position, as it's not controlled what they do with their input. I think that's probably the most important one. If we have that security, that we have competitive access to energy, and of course, preferably it's green, as we all want to be more sustainable and greener in future. That is already from market dynamics covering a lot, because in general, we have in Europe a lot of companies that are very successful, that are innovation leaders already in their industries, that are also leaders in terms of sustainability. So it all comes back to this level playing field arguments and discussions, right? If we do that, then I think the markets and the companies can do the rest itself.
Thank you. Julia, do you also want to reflect there on the results of the poll, or on the situation in general?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, to me, thinking about it at a more like philosophical level, since Rob can give us the on the ground issues, I guess it's always a tension between like state intervention and let's say more organic markets on the one hand. It's also I guess it will be very important for the Commission, and this is what they're now trying to do, to create very fluid communications between European parties, political parties on the one hand, and in the industrial sector on the other hand, so that what is needed is really what is done, as opposed to reverting to a highly planned type of strategy.
Thank you. I want to now bring in, as I promised, from the European Parliament, MEP Urmas Preit from Renew Europe. Can you see and hear us, Urmas?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just discussing the question of the strategic autonomy and not being over-reliant on third countries. We've talked a little bit about China and the perhaps anti-competitive practices. Perhaps you could give me just your sort of overarching thoughts on that, and then we'll come on to, I want to talk a little bit about specific actions.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I'm absolutely sure that the European Union has to do much more to be less independent from third countries, especially in very important and strategic areas. Just having here still the COVID pandemic, and one of the lessons learned here is how much actually Europe was, at least in spring, dependent from different medical supplies, which is certainly critical. If you look at some other issues, for example, European defense cooperation, which still is, of course, not on the level where it should be. Again, here is very much related to this, how capable Europe is from security and defense point of view, including defense industry issues. Or when we speak about foreign policy, then, well, every country who wants to be serious and global player should have at least 4 pillars in its foreign and security policy. It is classical diplomacy, it is foreign trade, it is development cooperation, and it is again security and defense. But in the case of the European Union, unfortunately, these 4 pillars are not working together adequately. And I guess that when we speak about trade, then of course the EU is not using all the potential which our common market and foreign trade has, be it in relations with China, be it with any other third country. So that, yes, short answer is that there is a lot to do in this regard.
Thank you for that. I think we're all caught up now. We're going to talk a little bit about, specific policies that are needed to ensure a level playing field. So we're going to go back to our polling tool, where I'm going to ask the question, what is your personal view on the effectiveness of a carbon border tax? So again, you will have A, B, and C. A will ensure a truly level playing field. B, it will lead to the death of worldwide trade. Or C, it will not make any difference. So for the fatalists out there, please use the voting tool. It's to the right of your screen. We want to hear your thoughts. And of course, our panelists will be reflecting on those votes as well. Now, let me turn first to Peter Handley. You can give us your thoughts on what you would have answered to that. And I suspect you may well say again, none of the above.
Indeed, it's option D again for me. I think it's clearly one of the tools which we've already established at the highest political levels is something we really want to explore, because it's a way of equalizing at the border to make sure that Europe can pursue its very high ambitions in terms of climate and environment. It can invest in clean technologies, and it can be sure that the market conditions in Europe are such that if anyone wants to sell in Europe, they have to respect the values that we set for the European market. The single market is still a wonderful asset that Europe has, and all parts of the world, they want to sell their products here. So I think we haven't quite worked out what is the right technical mechanism. It may not be a tax, for example, it may be something else, but we haven't quite decided whether it's going to apply to a whole range of products or a select number of sort of basic products. All these things are out there for discussion, and we're very open to hear the views of different sectors. But clearly, we need to do more than we're doing today to try and deliver this level playing field, which we've all said is so important.
Rob, your thoughts on the carbon border mechanism and the carbon border tax. Tell me your thoughts.
Okay, I think I can add that's the thoughts in general that we are aligned on. If we talk about the whole aluminium industry, as I'm also representing them in the executive committee. I mean, of course, the idea in general to make sure at the border that we adjust whenever there is something not correct compared to what we do is nice, but I think it's very doubtful that we can solve that just with the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I mean, in general, we really stand for free and fair trade, right? Level playing field. And what I mentioned, nothing to hide. We are front runners. No matter if you look at the carbon footprint, we are already only at a level of 1/3 compared to our Chinese competition. Nevertheless, we still saw over the last 2 decades that there was no single investment since the 90s in Europe in this area of smelting. And at the same time, the Chinese multiplied by 5. So that already shows the heavy change in that market, resulting in a 60% aluminium production of the worldwide consumption in China today, coming from a little bit above 10%, not even 10 years down the road. So it's a real massive increase. And I mean, they are and that's where we see the big problem in this, right? If you look at this, I mean, the CO2 adjustment, I mean, how would we tackle all the complexity that we see already in our supply chain to make sure that it's done the right way, that there is no circumvention? I mean, when the Green Deal was announced, and of course we know the big 5 Chinese companies that I mentioned before that receive the majority of the money and keep investing like hell, right? They have, even since the pandemic is there, they have record high growth this year again, despite the fact that the local demand is lower. So guess what they will do with it? I mean, in fact, we know that their idle capacity can easily take over the full demand of the European market. And when we announced the Green Deal and all the CO2 discussion, the border tax adjustment, I think it was like 3 months, they announced that one of their biggest new smelter project, they would just add it with a full supply of hydropower energy for 3 million ton production. That's more than we produce in Europe. and it was announced only a couple months. I mean, it's $1 billion projects. They just do it, and they will just allocate this metal to Europe, and the dirty aluminium will stay in China. I mean, this does not help the global view on this, right? So I think it's very, very complex to tackle this, to make sure that we cover all the possibilities to circumvent and to play around with this. So it's, I think, an honorable idea, but very tough to handle. So I think we think it's more realistic and preferably easier to do it in a way that if we see that there is not a level playing field and there is really a chance to tackle that, to do it with negotiation position in terms of put a duty first and take that into account if you put duty measures, and then start to discuss about level playing field, WTO, to come back to a normal. So that's our position on this, as we think that the CBAM it will be very tough to be set up in a way that is effective, even if I understand what we want to do with it. And it's good that we know and we realize that we have to do something. So we accept that, but we don't think that CBAM will be the most effective tool to protect our value chain against carbon leakage.
Thanks, Rob. Julia, you've heard there Rob's very boots on the ground position. Tell me, what's your position on this? What do you think? I mean, you also heard Peter there speaking about the importance of a strong single market. How do we balance these areas?
I mean, I think I very much agree with Rob. Maybe this is not the preferable tool to deal with overcapacities or competition type of issues. Now, in terms of an environmental instrument, I'm personally in favor of it. But as Peter also mentioned, that the devil will lie in the details. Some of my colleagues have been working for years now on different scenarios for the implementation, and some lead to absurd outcomes and some lead to very good outcomes, but it's going to be very difficult to find the right parameters. So it's going to be very technical design questions that will ultimately drive, I think, the success of it as an environmental tool, and focus on anti-subsidies instrument for the competition tools, for the competition issues.
Yes, Urmas, what are your thoughts on the carbon border tax? Is it the panacea to cure all ills, or is it simply a tool for a specific problem?
No, I think that it's still a very important issue, because there are two main goals. One, of course, is environmental, to also push countries and companies all around the globe to have less CO2 emissions. And then second, simply is fair competition. Because at the moment in the EU, a lot of our European companies are simply in unfair competition. For example, in the field of energy, we have in certain European countries quite big share of imported electricity, but this imported electricity is produced on the basis of oil shale or coal without any CO2 emission taxes, because they are produced outside the EU and then imported to Europe. And here, of course, they have cheaper prices comparing with European producers. So that energy, which is, of course, very important sphere also for all European economy, here we see at the moment a very deep, unfair situation on our markets. Or take aviation, or take any other important European economy pillar, where we see that simply European companies, European businesses are in unfair situation. So that my short comment will be that, of course, we have to proceed. I completely agree that it is very complex issue, but at least the two aims, two goals are big and important enough that it is worth to proceed.
Thank you. And I think we can see now as well what the audience made of that question. So again, no clear winner, nothing that's, no one over 50%. So about 45% think it will ensure a truly level playing field, but 35% think it will not make any difference, and 20% think it will lead to the death of world trade. Peter, thoughts or responses on that?
Well, I'm surprised that so many people think it will, on its own, ensure a truly level playing field. It's only one tool in a toolbox.
I think that's quite a surprisingly high number there for that number B, or letter B. We have also got coming in questions from our audience. I want to encourage everyone, please do use the tool to send questions to the panelists, and we will do our best to get through them in the next few minutes. Now, this one is a question for Urmas, for you. It's from Ronald Arvidsson, who says, doesn't independence in the face of COVID have similarities to the Cold War era in terms of the need for domestic productions and mining? Urmas, could you tackle that one for me?
Well, I guess for me, it's simply common sense issue. That there are certain security areas where European Union must be able, well, not to be dependent on third powers or third countries, so that they are mainly spheres related to the security of our societies and our people. And at the same time, when we speak about 470 million people in the EU, well, the biggest economy, globally, then I guess that actually we have the capacity, at least in the most important security areas, not to be dependent. So that it has nothing to do with the parallels from past, but it is, I guess, simply common sense issue.
Thank you. Another question from Luce Martens towards Peter. They're saying that there's been a dangerous increase on EU dependence from abroad. The EU should encourage exploration, extraction, and processing of raw materials from domestic minerals. I'm paraphrasing here, but whatever happened to the raw materials initiative of 12 years ago?
Well, it's still there, but it's there with a whole fresh new coat of paint on it, because in September we came out with an action plan on critical raw materials. It's still rooted in the analysis we had 12 years ago, but we're not making the progress we need to, because the world is changing around us faster than we're adapting. So we've come up with a 10-point action plan, which includes doing much more with the potential we have in Europe. And I know Luis well, Portugal is one of the front runners in terms of trying to position itself not just as extracting battery raw materials like lithium, but developing a key role in the batteries value chain. Okay, so this is the kind of thing we should be doing. Other parts of Europe are also looking at this, Finland, Sweden, but it's not just in those countries. Just read today what the United Kingdom, which is now no longer part of the EU, is planning to do. It's planning a really aggressive ramp up of gigafactories, phasing out traditional cars by 2030. It sees huge industrial opportunities here, and that's what we're also seeing in the European Union as part of our European Green Deal, and really turning around industry to serve these new objectives.
Okay, I think this next one I'm going to ask Rob to respond first, and then perhaps other panelists might want to jump in. It's coming in from Andreas Oberrauner, saying that many European states are welcoming Chinese companies. Look at Croatia, Serbia, and France. We even support a new Silk Road. How can the raw materials lobby work against this in the light of other political views? Rob, your response to that?
My first response is that I can 100% confirm this also for the aluminium industry. We see that for several reasons, especially the former Yugoslavian companies, Serbia is very well linked to the Chinese. They also offer them very easy travel and visa policies to make the Chinese access Europe easier. And a lot of big investments in our industry in Europe have been done by Chinese companies, heavily supported by the Serbian government, for example. So the biggest single investment in European extrusion industry, for example, was done in Serbia by a Chinese company, and fully supported by subsidies from the Serbian government. So this underlines that that's something we really have to also look at, and to make sure that that also here, as of course Serbia is one of the candidates, or at least in the position to have easier access to our markets, to make sure that those, but it's not only Serbia, it's a lot of other regions, especially now also in the discussions about Brexit. Also, I think in Africa there is some countries. We know the Chinese also use those countries to circumvent and to try to access our market. So yes, it's something we really have to keep an eye on, and we also need to find a way to fight it. So I mean, the way we do it in the aluminium industry is to really carefully watch trade volumes and that are coming from those countries, investments that are going there, and what that means for our businesses. And of course, we try to communicate as, of course, we use European aluminium as our voice. I mean, we are business people, right? We are not politicians. So we need to transfer our experience and that what we see in daily life with our feet on the ground to the Commission. So they experience this and they see what is really the pain in daily business, to make sure that we react fast and accurate without damaging the general idea of free trade. Again, nobody is arguing about free trade. Also, we as aluminium industry, free trade is a solution that we have to balance out at the end of the day. The problem is only if you have to trade with unfair partners. And that's, I think, something that we will have down the road for a couple of years, because it's, as we already see also in today's discussion and also the feedback on the polls, it's very complex and it's hard to find an easy solution for, as it's a global topic. And we even have our difficulties to find common positions within the European Union on a lot of those things. So that is just, underlining that it's a complex thing. And I think from my point of view, the only thing we can do and I can do is to make sure that our daily business and the problems we face, we make sure that the Commission gets to know them. And it's their job, together with their counterparts in the global world, to hopefully someday find a global fair play solution for a level playing field, and then a free trade. Again, free trade is the best solution, no doubt.
Julia, I want to ask you this, the same question that Rob has just alluded to. Are we in that perennial position of conflict between member states, with some enthusiastically welcoming and embracing the new Silk Road or the Belt and Road Initiative, whereas others are much more skeptical? Is this one of those old problems again?
Oof, I must say that I steer clear of the politics. But to complement Rob's answer, I think that by this time next year, there's high chances that the kinds of investments that might be seen as problematic because subsidized will be potentially blockable by the Commission in the way that they're not now. The Commission proposed a new anti-subsidies tool to tackle subsidized investments. I think there's going to be a legislative proposal by the coming summer, and it could mean that potential buyers from third countries that are suspected of being subsidized will be investigated by the Commission, and if it is found that they're using subsidies to distort, using the subsidies in order to facilitate the purchase or investments in European assets in a way that distorts competition in Europe, the Commission will have the authorities to intervene and, at the extreme, to block the transaction, probably. So I think this should give hope.
Thomas, do you see this? The question there was how raw materials lobby can work against some countries embracing China and others not. How do you think anyone within the European Parliament might approach this, or at policy-making level?
Well, I guess if you look at the European-Chinese relations, then it is, of course, also very much political one. And no doubt that our aim is and should be, well, common foreign and security policy. But the reality is that still it is not functioning too well in relations with China. And problem is that in some cases, the dependency from China, also from business point of view, is already too high. So that to get one language among 27 member states vis-a-vis China is already very, very complicated. And I see here that there is also clear lack of real political will from the European Council. It means from, well, at least some member states, and also from the European Commission. Because we have, for example, this kind of strange format called 17+1, for example. 1 is China, of course, and 17, there are poorer EU member states from Central and Eastern Europe and some countries from Balkans who are not even members of the EU. But there is special format 17+1. I think that here the European Union as such, including European Commission, must be very clear that this format is not supporting common foreign security, but also trade policy vis-à-vis China. So that in this sense, before or parallelly, we look at the details or concrete deals with some Chinese companies between the countries. We also should have much clearer and stronger common political approach. But at the moment, it's not there. So that the German presidency this year said that the main issue for foreign policy will be EU-China relations. Well, this presidency term is now going to an end, and we even didn't have a European Union-China summit. This was cancelled. We, unfortunately, are not, how to say, so clear as we, for example, should be when it goes for different, well, human rights problems in China. At the moment, EU is politically very critical with, well, in other countries with breaches of human rights issues, but not in China. And of course, China also understands and sees it. So that in this regard, to avoid the further unfair competition situation between EU and China and our companies, it also needs much more stronger and clearer political framework, because in China there is no free business. Everything is, well, very closely linked to politics, to security interest of this country, because it's, well, authoritarian regime. And I guess that this kind of awareness also should be increased here in Europe. 5G, well, discussions in Europe. We have our excellent companies, Nokia and Ericsson in Europe, who can deliver whatever is needed for 5G. So that in this sense, Huawei and Chinese interests, what concerns telecommunications and 5G and all the security risks, well, if we look all these issues on the one picture, then yes, there is much more space also for political improvement in the EU when we speak about our, well, common foreign and security policy vis-à-vis China, which of course directly also affects our businesses and their competition situation, what concerns China.
Thank you. A last question then, as we are almost at the end of our time for this panel. Darius Amadeus Pedron has said that even President-elect Biden mentioned that public funds should only flow to companies that produce in the US. Is that an option for the EU too? I'm going to ask all of you to respond to that in just a sentence or two. So very briefly, is that an option for the EU? Rob?
I think it would not be the right signal if we at the end want to achieve a fair, level playing field and free trade sometime in maybe a couple of years.
Or 13% of our GDP comes from public procurement. This would be exactly impossible to do while respecting the way that we in the European Union do public procurement. It's not exclusively to your own national supplier or a European supplier. Whoever gives you the best offer is entitled to receive a procurement contract. So I think it's very problematic.
Your thoughts in response to that question?
Well, I guess that it's not black and white situation, because I guess from, well, international affairs perspective, we also should see which are the possibilities for our companies to participate in the same type of competitions in third countries. So that reciprocity issue is there as well. So that in this regard, of course, free trade is the must, but it should not mean that under this slogan, our businesses are in unfair situation comparing with, well, third country companies.
And last but not least, Julia, is that an option for the EU? Should it be?
I mean, from a purely economic efficiency point of view, no. You want your companies to compete on the global stage and to compete with global firms so that they become better. I mean, exposure to a competitive environment makes our industry stronger. So I don't think we should shelter them.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good point to wrap up this first panel. Thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us and for the audience for sending in questions. Don't go away, because we are coming back with another panel in just a few moments. You have time to grab a coffee, but that's about it. Our next panel will be on green as a driving force of the EU recovery. We'll be rejoining our new panelists at 15:50 or 10 to 4. So stay with us.